The war room aboard the Valterian flagship Dominance hummed with activity as holographic displays showed the target system in perfect detail. Admiral Koss examined the tactical readouts with satisfaction, his 4 eyes studying every piece of intelligence his scouts had gathered over the past year. The human colony of New Terra appeared defenseless, protected by nothing more than 2 aging patrol vessels and a single, orbital station that looked like it had been cobbled together from mining equipment. 12 star systems in 200 years. Koss muttered to his tactical officer. These humans expand like frightened children, slowly and carefully. They lack the warrior spirit that built our hegemony. The tactical officer, a lean Valterian named Vec, nodded in agreement. Our intelligence indicates their technology is at least 50 years behind our own. Their ships show no evidence of advanced shielding or weapon systems. Even their largest vessels are smaller than our escorts. Koss walked to the observation deck where 3 massive battleships hung in formation against the starfield. Each ship stretched over 2 kilometers in length, bristling with plasma cannons and torpedo bays. The Dominance, Supremacy, and Victory represented the finest military technology the hegemony had developed over 8 centuries of conquest. Against them, the humans had sent nothing but a polite request to leave their space. The memory of that transmission still amused Koss. The human commander had actually cited something called the Geneva Conventions and requested a peaceful dialogue. They had listed rules about the treatment of prisoners and civilians, as if war was some kind of gentleman's game played by ancient nobility. Such naivety would be almost charming if it wasn't so pathetic. "Admiral, we're receiving another transmission from the human vessels," the communications officer announced. "They're requesting we withdraw to discuss territorial boundaries through diplomatic channels." "Let them request," Koss replied with a dismissive gesture. "Have our ships moved into attack formation? Today the galaxy learns that the Valterian hegemony takes what it wants when it wants it." The 3 battleships began their approach toward New Terra, their massive engines casting blue fire across the darkness. The human patrol ships, tiny by comparison, held their position near the orbital station. Koss had to admit there was something admirable about their stubbornness, even if it was ultimately pointless. "Sir, the human station is attempting to evacuate civilians," Vec reported. "Small transport ships are launching from the surface. How many people are we looking at?" Koss asked, more out of curiosity than concern. "Approximately 50,000. On the station itself, another 200,000 on the planet below. The colony appears to be primarily focused on agriculture and mining operations." Koss nodded slowly. The hegemony's expansion doctrine was clear about dealing with primitive species. Show overwhelming force, demand surrender, and if they refused, demonstrate the consequences of defying superior civilizations. It was a formula that had worked across dozens of worlds and hundreds of species. "Open a channel to all human vessels and installations," he commanded. The main screen flickered to life, showing Koss in his full military regalia. Behind him, the bridge of the Dominance displayed the technological superiority of his people. Weapon systems hummed with barely contained energy, and holographic displays showed the tactical situation in overwhelming detail. "I am Admiral Koss of the Valterian hegemony," he began, his voice carrying the authority of countless victories. "You have entered space that now belongs to us. Your primitive settlements will be absorbed into our territory, and your people will serve the greater glory of our civilization. Surrender immediately, and your transition to our rule will be painless. Resist, and we will demonstrate why lesser species should show proper respect to their superiors." The response came quickly from one of the human patrol ships. The voice was calm, almost conversational, lacking any trace of the fear Koss expected to hear. "Admiral Koss, this is Captain Stone of the Human Colonial Defense Force. I want to be very clear about our position. You have entered sovereign human territory without permission. We have no quarrel with your people, but we will not surrender our colonies to aggressive expansion. I strongly advise you to withdraw your forces and contact the colonial administration to discuss any territorial disputes through proper diplomatic channels." Koss felt his combat instinct sharpen. This human actually thought he was in a position to make demands. The arrogance was almost refreshing after dealing with so many species that simply collapsed at the first show of force. Captain Stone, you command 2 obsolete patrol vessels against 3 of the most advanced battleships in this sector of the galaxy. Your orbital station has no significant weapons, and your colony has no planetary defenses. This is not a negotiation. This is your final opportunity to save your people's lives. Admiral, I need you to understand something about humans, Stone replied, and Koss heard something in his voice that hadn't been there before, something harder. We've been fighting wars since before we left our home planet. We know exactly what we're facing, and we know exactly what it means. You want to take our colony, you'll have to go through us. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Dominance in silence. Koss felt a moment of genuine surprise. He had expected begging or desperate attempts at bargaining. Instead, this Captain Stone sounded like he was looking forward to the fight. Tactical analysis, Koss ordered. Their patrol ships are moving into defensive positions around the orbital station, Vec reported. No additional vessels detected in the system. No distress signals being transmitted. They appeared to be preparing to engage. Koss studied the tactical display with growing interest. The human ships were positioning themselves in a pattern he didn't recognize, creating overlapping fields of fire that suggested more tactical sophistication than their intelligence had indicated. Still, 2 ships against 3 was mathematics that no amount of courage could overcome. All ships prepare for combat operations. Target the orbital station first. Once we've eliminated their civilians, these patrol ships will either surrender or die uselessly. Either outcome serves our purposes. The weapon systems of all 3 battleships powered up simultaneously, casting an eerie glow across the hulls. Plasma cannons swiveled toward their targets while torpedo bays loaded their first salvos. The Dominance alone carried enough firepower to reduce the human station to debris in minutes. Weapons ready, Admiral, the tactical officer announced. Koss took one final look at the human positions. They hadn't moved, hadn't tried to run, hadn't sent desperate pleas for mercy. They simply waited, 2 tiny ships against impossible odds, protecting their people the only way they could. Fire, Koss commanded, and the stars lit up with the fury of Valterian weapons. The explosion tore through the agricultural section of New Terra Station like a thunderclap in the void. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in red as atmosphere vented through twisted metal, carrying with it the screams of 3,000 colonists, who had been trying to evacuate when the Valterian plasma cannons found their mark. David Stone felt the shock wave through the hull of his ship even from 50 kilometers away, and he knew that everything had just changed, the bridge of the patrol. Vessel Defiance erupted in controlled chaos as his crew worked their stations with practiced efficiency. Lieutenant Williams called out damage reports from the station while Ensign Rodriguez tracked the movement of the alien battleships. Stone himself remained perfectly still in his command chair, watching the tactical display with the calm expression that had earned him command of the colony's defense force. Captain, the station's agricultural bay is gone, Williams reported, her voice tight with professional control. We're reading massive hull breaches across sections 12 through 18. Emergency crews are trying to seal the compartments, but we've lost contact with most of the civilian evacuation teams in that area. Stone nodded once, his eyes never leaving the display where 3 massive alien ships continued their methodical approach. The mathematics were simple and brutal. 200-year-old patrol ships against 3 state-of-the-art battleships. His weapons could barely scratch their shields, and their firepower could vaporize his entire force in minutes. But mathematics had never been the most important factor in human conflicts. Rodriguez, get me a secure channel to Colonial Command. On Earth, he ordered, emergency priority, full encryption. Channel open, sir, Rodriguez replied within seconds. Stone leaned forward in his chair, choosing his words with the precision of a man who understood that history would remember this moment. Colonial Command, this is Captain Stone aboard the Defiance in the New Terra system. We have made contact with a hostile alien force identifying themselves as the Veltarian hegemony. 3 battleships entered our space approximately 2 hours ago and demanded our surrender. I followed first contact protocols and attempted diplomatic resolution. They responded by firing on civilian targets. New Terra Station has suffered massive casualties, estimate 3,000 dead. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle across the light years between him and home. When he continued, his voice carried a different quality, something his crew had never heard before. Colonial Command, they fired first. Repeat, hostile aliens fired first on civilian targets after we attempted peaceful contact. I am implementing. Defense Protocol 7, Stone out. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of ship systems and the distant sounds of emergency klaxons from the dying station. Protocol 7 was something every Colonial Defense Force officer knew by heart, but none of them had ever expected to use. It was humanity's response to unprovoked aggression against civilian populations. It meant that the rules of engagement had just been thrown out the airlock. Sir, William said quietly, Protocol 7 authorizes the use of any and all means necessary to defend human populations. That includes weapons and tactics prohibited under the Colonial Accords. I'm aware of the protocol, Lieutenant, Stone replied. Begin implementation immediately. All safety restrictions on our weapon systems are hereby lifted. Arm every torpedo we have, including the experimental warheads. Reroute power from life support to engines and shields. Lieutenant Commander Harris, the ship's tactical officer, looked up from his console with barely concealed excitement. Captain, are you authorizing the use of the fusion mines? Stone turned to face him, and Harris saw something in his commander's eyes that made him sit up straighter. Harris, as of this moment we are not bound by any restrictions except our mission to protect human civilians. Use everything we have? The Defiance began to change as his crew implemented modifications they had trained for but never expected to deploy. Safety protocols that limited weapon power to prevent damage to the ship itself were bypassed. Experimental weapons that had been deemed too dangerous for standard use were brought online. The ship's reactor output increased by 30%. As emergency overrides pushed every system beyond normal operating parameters. Captain, the 2nd Patrol Ship Resilience is requesting orders, Rodriguez reported. Put me through to Captain Murphy. David, came the familiar voice of his longtime friend and fellow commander. I just got word about Protocol 7. My ship is ready for implementation. Good, Murphy. I want you to know that we're probably not going home from this one. Those ships out there can crush us without breaking a sweat. But those bastards just murdered 3,000 of our people, including kids who were trying to evacuate to safety. Understood, my crew is ready. We knew the risks when we took these postings. Stone looked around his bridge at the faces of his 18 crew members. Most of them were young volunteers who had joined the Colonial Defense Force for the adventure of exploring the galaxy. Now they sat at their stations preparing to die in defense of strangers they had never met. Simply because those strangers were human. All right, people, listen up, Stone announced to both ships. In about 10 minutes, those alien battleships are going to finish destroying the station and then come for us. They think we're going to run or surrender because we're outgunned and outclassed. They're about to learn something about humanity that apparently didn't make it into their intelligence reports. He paused, studying the tactical display where the Veltarian ships continued their systematic destruction of the orbital facility. Emergency pods were still launching from the station, tiny specks of light carrying survivors away from the carnage. Every pod that escaped was a small victory, a few more human lives saved from alien aggression. We are Colonial Defense Force, Stone continued, his voice carrying clearly to every person under his command. Our job is not to win battles or conquer territory. Our job is to stand between our people and anyone who wants to hurt them. Today, some aliens decided to murder human civilians. That was their choice. Our choice is what we do about it. The alien battleships finished their bombardment of the station and began moving toward the 2 patrol ships. Even at maximum magnification, they looked like moving mountains bristling with weapons that could sterilize planets. Against them, the Defiance and Resilience looked like insects preparing to attack eagles. "Captain," Harris reported, "all weapon systems are armed and ready. Fusion mines are deployed along our projected course. Experimental warheads are loaded and targeting solutions are locked." "Rodriguez, begin broadcasting on all frequencies," Stone ordered. "I want everyone in the galaxy to hear what happens here." "Channel open, sir." Stone stood up from his command chair and faced the main screen where the alien battleships continued their approach. When he spoke, his words carried across space to receivers throughout human space and beyond. "This is Captain David Stone of the Human Colonial Defense Force. Today, the Valterian hegemony chose to attack human civilians without provocation. They destroyed a civilian station and murdered 3,000 innocent people, including children. The galaxy should know that humanity does not forget such acts, and we do not forgive them." The lead battleship opened fire, plasma beams lancing across space toward the Defiance. Stone gripped his chair as the ship shuddered under impacts that should have destroyed it instantly. "Today you learn why humans never go quietly into the dark," Stone continued, his voice steady even as his ship died around him. "You learn why we survived everything our own world could throw at us, and why we'll survive everything you can throw at us. You want to kill human children? Come and take your best shot." The Defiance exploded in a ball of fusion fire that lit up the system like a second sun, taking the lead Valterian battleship with it. Earth received the transmission from New Terra at exactly 0347 hours Coordinated Universal Time, and within minutes every government on the planet was awake and moving. Admiral Rebecca Hayes had been reviewing patrol reports in her office at Colonial Command when the priority alert came through, but by the time she finished listening to Stone's final message, she was already running toward the Strategic Operations Center with a growing crowd of officers behind her. The massive holographic display in the center of the room showed the entire human sphere of influence, 12-star systems connected by shipping lanes and communication relays. As Hayes watched, status indicators began changing from green to amber to red as every installation received the same message. The galaxy's newest spacefaring species had just been attacked by hostile aliens who killed civilians without provocation. "Get May fleet status reports from every system," Hayes ordered as she took her position at the command console. "I want to know the location and readiness status of every human vessel larger than a cargo pod. Military, civilian, corporate, private, everything." The operations staff moved with the efficiency of people who had trained for this scenario but never expected to face it in reality. Within 20 minutes, Hayes had a complete picture of human space capabilities, and what she saw would have surprised any alien intelligence analyst. Humanity had not built massive battleships or concentrated their forces in a few powerful fleets. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous. Lieutenant Colonel Park approached with a data tablet, her expression grim but determined. "Admiral, total fleet assets available for immediate deployment. We have 47 dedicated military vessels ranging from destroyers to the heavy cruiser Vengeance." "But that's not the interesting number." "Show me," Hayes said, studying the tactical display. "We have over 3,000 civilian vessels currently in space. Cargo haulers, mining ships, exploration vessels, colony transports, research platforms. Under Emergency Protocol 7, every one of them can be converted for military operations within 72 hours. Hayes felt a cold smile cross her face. The aliens had attacked humans expecting to face a conventional military force, but humanity had never been conventional. They had learned warfare on a planet where survival meant adapting, improvising, and using every available resource. Now they would teach that lesson to the galaxy. "Begin immediate implementation of the Swarm Protocol," she ordered. "Every available vessel is to be converted for combat operations. Military priority on all industrial facilities. I want weapons, armor, and shield generators installed on anything that can hold them." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across 12-star systems, human civilization shifted into a war footing that shocked alien observers. Mining ships that had been extracting asteroids suddenly began mounting military-grade weapons. Cargo haulers started loading torpedo tubes instead of trade goods. Even passenger liners were fitted with armor plating and defensive systems. The Hegemony Intelligence Network, which had been monitoring human space for months, began sending increasingly frantic reports back to their military command. The species they had identified as technologically inferior was displaying industrial capacity that dwarfed their own estimates. More importantly, they were displaying a unified response that suggested a level of coordination no hegemony analyst had predicted. Hayes stood before the main strategic display watching her forces assemble. The first wave would consist of 200 vessels, everything that could be converted and deployed within 72 hours. It wasn't the largest fleet in galactic history, but it would be unlike anything their enemies had ever faced. Admiral, we have a communication from the Valterian hegemony, the communications officer announced. They're demanding we acknowledge their territorial claim to the new Terra system and withdraw all human forces from the region. Let me guess, Hayes replied without looking away from the tactical display. They're offering to negotiate terms. For our surrender, yes, ma'am. They seem to believe they're negotiating from a position of strength. Hayes turned to face the communications station, and every officer in the room saw something in her expression that made them straighten up. It was the look of someone who had just been personally insulted by people who didn't understand the magnitude of their mistake. Open a channel to their command ship, she ordered. Full military protocol. The main screen flickered to life, showing Admiral Koss on the bridge of the Supremacy. Behind him, Hayes could see the two remaining Valterian battleships holding position near the debris field that had once been New Terra Station. The alien commander looked confident, almost bored, as if this conversation was merely a formality before accepting human surrender. Admiral Koss? Hayes began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who commanded the military forces of an entire species. I am Admiral Rebecca Hayes of the Human Colonial Defense Force. You have attacked civilian targets in sovereign human space and murdered 3,000 innocent people. You have 48 hours to withdraw your forces from human territory and surrender yourself for trial. Koss actually laughed, a sound that carried undertones of genuine amusement. Admiral Hayes, you seem to be confused about your situation. I have 2 battleships in this system and the full might of the Valterian hegemony behind me. You have lost your only defensive ships and your orbital installation? Your colony is defenseless, and your species lacks the military capacity to challenge us. Admiral Koss, Hayes replied, and now her voice carried something that made several junior officers on both bridges take an involuntary step backward. You're about to learn something about humans that your intelligence apparently missed. We don't just have a military. When you attack our civilians, you attack all of us. The screen went dark, leaving the operations center in tense silence. Hayes turned back to the tactical display where indicators showed human forces converging on New Terra from every direction. Ships that had been scattered across 12-star systems were now moving with the coordination of a single organism responding to a threat. Fleet status report, Hayes ordered. First wave deployment complete. Park announced. 200 vessels equipped and moving toward New Terra. Estimated arrival in 36 hours. Second wave of 400 ships will be ready for deployment within 96 hours. Third wave preparations are underway. Hayes nodded, studying the formation patterns her fleet commanders had chosen. They weren't arranging their ships in the traditional battle lines favored by most galactic militaries. Instead, they were forming loose swarms that could attack from multiple vectors simultaneously. It was a tactic born from humanity's experience, fighting in 3-dimensional space against enemies who expected 2-dimensional thinking. Admiral, the intelligence officer called out, we're receiving reports from our monitoring stations. Valterian forces are requesting reinforcements from their home fleet. They appear to be concerned about our response. Good, Hayes replied. They should be concerned. Send a message to all human colonies and installations. Protocol 7 is now in full effect. Any alien vessel that enters human space without permission is to be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. The transformation of human space continued as word of the new Terra attack spread. Mining facilities began producing military-grade explosives instead of processed metals. Shipyards that had been building cargo vessels started assembling warships. Research stations focused their efforts on developing new weapons, systems, and defensive technologies, but the most significant change was in the humans themselves. The attack on New Terra had awakened something that alien psychologists didn't understand and military planners hadn't accounted for. It was the same instinct that had driven humans to fight impossible odds throughout their history. The same determination that had carried them from their homeworld to the stars. They had been in space for only 200 years, but they had brought with them 10,000 years of warfare, adaptation, and survival. Now the galaxy was about to see what happened when a species that had evolved as hunters decided to go hunting. Hayes looked at the tactical display one final time before heading to the Fleet Command Center. In 36 hours, the Veltarian hegemony would face an enemy unlike anything in their experience. They would face humans who were no longer interested in diplomacy, negotiation, or peaceful coexistence. They would face humans who were ready for war. The Veltarian reinforcement fleet arrived at New Terra expecting to find 2 human patrol ships destroyed and Admiral Koss accepting the surrender of a defenseless colony. Instead, they found themselves facing something that no military doctrine in their database had prepared them for. 200 human ships arranged in patterns that defied conventional tactical analysis, moving like schools of predatory fish rather than organized military formations. Admiral Koss stood on the bridge of the Supremacy staring at sensor readings that made no sense. The human vessels were individually smaller and less powerful than his battleships, but their numbers created tactical problems he had never encountered. Worse, their behavior suggested a level of coordination that should have been impossible, without massive command and control systems that his scanners couldn't detect. Tactical analysis, he demanded from his increasingly nervous staff. Sir, the human vessels appear to be operating under a distributed command structure. His tactical officer replied, consulting displays that showed shifting formation patterns. We can't identify a flagship or command hierarchy. They're moving, as if each ship knows exactly what every other ship is planning to do. The answer came 60 seconds later when the human fleet attacked. They didn't charge forward in battle lines or attempt to engage at maximum range. Instead, they swarmed from every direction at once, using tactics that seemed to treat each individual ship as expendable. While protecting the fleet as a whole, the first wave consisted of 30 converted cargo haulers that had been fitted with engines designed for racing and armor that wouldn't stop a serious attack. They accelerated toward the Veltarian formation at speeds that should have torn their hulls apart, broadcasting signals that jammed enemy targeting systems while launching clouds of metallic chaff to confuse sensors. Suicide attack, Koss muttered, watching the small ships approach, primitive but predictable. All batteries open fire. The Veltarian battleships unleashed concentrated firepower that should have vaporized the approaching vessels instantly. Some of the cargo haulers did explode in brilliant fireballs, but others survived long enough to release their payloads. Instead of conventional weapons, they had been loaded with thousands of small objects that scattered across space like metallic snow. Debris field deployment, the tactical officer announced with growing alarm. They're trying to create a navigation hazard. Koss was about to order evasive maneuvers when the second wave struck. 50 mining ships, their industrial equipment converted into weapons that fired streams of molten metal and clouds of superheated plasma. They attacked from above and below the debris field, using the scattered material to mask their approach. Until they were close enough to engage at point-blank range, the battle became a chaotic melee as human ships used tactics that seemed designed to maximize confusion rather than inflict direct damage. Fast attack craft darted between the larger vessels, firing brief bursts before disappearing back into the debris field. Mining ships used their industrial cutting beams to slice through armor that had been designed to resist military weapons. Even passenger liners had been converted into missile platforms that launched swarms of guided projectiles before retreating to safe distances. "Sir, we're taking damage to multiple systems," the damage control officer reported. "These human weapons aren't conventional military designs. They're using industrial equipment that our defenses weren't designed to counter." Koss watched his tactical displays. The organized formations of his fleet began to break down under the relentless pressure. The humans weren't trying to win a traditional space battle. They were trying to overwhelm his forces through sheer weight of numbers and tactical unpredictability. The breakthrough came when a group of human research vessels approached from the rear of his formation. Koss had dismissed them as non-combatants, but they proved to be carrying experimental weapons that his sensors hadn't detected. Focused energy beams that could punch through battleship armor, gravity manipulators that disrupted ship systems, and something that interfered with Valterian communication networks. "Admiral, we've lost contact with the Victory," the communications officer announced. "She's still fighting, but we can't coordinate with her weapon systems." That was when Koss realized the humans weren't just attacking his ships. They were attacking his ability to command them. Every aspect of their assault seemed designed to isolate his vessels from each other and force them to fight as individuals rather than as a coordinated fleet. "Signal general retreat," he ordered, but even as he spoke, he could see that retreat might not be possible. Human ships had positioned themselves to block the most obvious escape routes, and more vessels were arriving from the direction of human space. The battle for New Terra lasted 18 hours and ended with the destruction of the Victory and severe damage to both remaining Valterian battleships. But when Admiral Koss finally managed to extract his surviving forces and retreat toward hegemony space, he discovered that the nightmare was just beginning. The human fleet followed him. Admiral Hayes had studied the tactical reports from New Terra and reached a conclusion that would have shocked alien military theorists throughout the galaxy. The Valterians had attacked human civilians, and they had demonstrated both the ability and willingness to commit what humans considered war crimes. Under those circumstances, the rules of engagement became very simple. All fleet commanders, Hayes announced from her flagship Retribution, "We are pursuing hostile forces into their territory. Our mission is to ensure that they understand the consequences of attacking human civilians. Any Valterian military installation that has supported the invasion of human space is a legitimate target." The pursuit became a systematic campaign of destruction that lasted 3 weeks and covered 6 star systems. Human forces attacked every hegemony military base they could locate, using the same swarm tactics that had proven so effective at New Terra. They didn't attempt to hold territory or establish occupation forces. They simply destroyed anything that could be used to threaten human space and moved on. The psychological impact on the hegemony was as devastating as the physical damage. For 8 centuries, they had expanded through the galaxy by demonstrating superior firepower and accepting the surrender of inferior species. Now they faced an enemy that seemed to consider individual ship losses acceptable as long as the overall mission succeeded. Worst of all, the humans showed no interest in negotiation or compromise. Every attempt at communication was met with the same response: complete withdrawal from human space and reparations for the New Terra attack. When hegemony diplomats suggested territorial concessions or trade agreements, the human response was always identical: "You killed our children. Now you pay the price." The campaign ended at the Proxima Vel system, site of the largest hegemony naval base in the region. Admiral Koss, commanding the remnants of his original force, plus whatever reinforcements he had been able to gather, made his final stand in orbit, around his people's most heavily fortified world. The human fleet that arrived to face him had grown to over 400 vessels, with more arriving daily. They had learned from each engagement, adapting their tactics and refining their weapon systems. What had started as converted civilian ships had evolved into a true military force unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Hayes broadcast her final ultimatum from the bridge of the Retribution as her fleet took position around the Valterian defenses. "Admiral Koss, this is Admiral Hayes. You have one opportunity to prevent the destruction of this installation and the death of everyone defending it. Surrender unconditionally and submit to trial for war crimes. Your choice." Koss looked around his bridge at officers who had served the hegemony with distinction for decades. They had conquered dozens of worlds and subjugated numerous species. Now they faced an enemy that seemed to view their military superiority as merely another problem to be solved through superior numbers and tactical innovation. "Admiral Hayes," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of defeat. "The Valtarian hegemony hereby requests terms for cessation of hostilities?" Hayes smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "Admiral, you don't understand the situation. This isn't a negotiation between equals. This is you learning what happens when someone hurts our people. Now surrender your fleet or we'll take it from you." The last battle of the New Terra War lasted 6 hours and resulted in the complete destruction of hegemony military power in 3 sectors of the galaxy. When it was over, Admiral Hayes found herself in command of human space that had effectively doubled in size, not through conquest but through the simple fact that no one in the region was willing to challenge humanity's claim to anything they wanted, but the most important victory wasn't territorial. It was the message that spread throughout the galaxy faster than any human ship could travel. Humanity was no longer the naive newcomer species that could be bullied by superior technology and ancient military traditions. They were predators, and they had just reminded the galaxy why predators were best left alone. The Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council had hosted diplomatic meetings for over 2,000 years, but it had never seen anything quite like this. 47 different species sat in their designated sections, each representing civilizations that had spent millennia learning the delicate art of interstellar diplomacy. At the center of the vast chamber, a single human woman stood at the speaker's podium, waiting for permission to address the most powerful political body in the known galaxy. Admiral Rebecca Hayes wore the dress uniform of the Human Colonial Defense Force, a simple design that somehow managed to project more authority than the elaborate ceremonial garments favored by most galactic diplomats. Behind her, arranged in neat rows, sat the remnants of the Valtarian delegation that had once commanded respect throughout this chamber. Now they looked like prisoners waiting for sentencing. The council speaker, an elderly representative of the ancient Altany Republic, called for order with ceremonial chimes that echoed through the vast space. The council recognizes Admiral Rebecca Hayes, speaking for the human species in the matter of territorial violations and reparations claims against the Valtarian hegemony. Hayes stepped forward, her eyes sweeping across delegates who represented civilizations older than human recorded history. Some watched her with curiosity, others with barely concealed hostility, and a few with what might have been fear. Word of the new Terra campaign had spread throughout diplomatic channels, carrying with it tactical reports that had shocked military analysts across the galaxy. "Honored delegates," Hayes began, her voice carrying clearly throughout the chamber without amplification. 3 months ago, the Valtarian hegemony made a decision that has changed the relationship between humanity and the galactic community. They chose to attack civilian targets in sovereign human space without provocation or declaration of war. They murdered 3,000 innocent people, including children who were trying to evacuate to safety. The chamber remained silent, but Hayes could see the subtle reactions of delegates who had read the intelligence reports. The humans had not simply defended themselves against aggression. They had pursued their attackers across multiple star systems and systematically dismantled hegemony military power in an entire sector of the galaxy. The hegemony justified this attack by claiming that humanity was too primitive and weak to defend our territories. Hayes continued, "They believed our small numbers and limited territorial holdings indicated a lack of military capability. They were wrong." She paused, letting that simple statement settle across the assembly. Every delegate in the chamber had access to the same tactical analysis, and every one of them understood what had actually happened. A species with 12 star systems had defeated a military alliance that controlled over 200 worlds. "We are here today because the Valtarian hegemony has requested council mediation to end hostilities and establish new territorial boundaries," Hayes continued. "They have also agreed to pay reparations for the damage inflicted on New Terra. Station and compensation to the families of those killed in their unprovoked attack. Admiral Koss shifted uncomfortably in his seat among the Veltarian delegation. The proud military commander who had begun this conflict expecting easy victory now looked like a man who had learned lessons he never wanted to learn. His fleet was gone, his military bases were rubble, and his government was desperately seeking any face-saving compromise that would prevent further human retaliation. However, Hayes said, and her tone carried a subtle shift that made several delegates lean forward in their seats. Humanity's concerns extend beyond simple reparations. The attack on New Terra was based on the assumption that we were weak and defenseless. This assumption appears to be widespread throughout the galactic community. She gestured toward a holographic display that materialized above the speakers. Podium, showing star charts of human territory and the surrounding regions. Red indicators marked locations where alien vessels had been detected conducting surveillance operations or making what appeared to be territorial probes. Over the past year, we have detected unauthorized incursions into human space by ships from 16 different species. Most of these have been intelligence-gathering operations, but several have involved armed vessels testing our defensive responses. It appears that many civilizations view humanity as a potential target for expansion or resource acquisition. The chamber erupted in a low murmur of conversation as delegates recognized their own species, activities displayed on the tactical readouts. The humans had not only been aware of these operations, they had been tracking and cataloging them with a precision that suggested far more sophisticated monitoring capabilities than anyone had suspected. This presents humanity with a choice, Hayes announced, and the chamber fell silent again. We can continue to react defensively to each individual threat as it emerges, or we can address the underlying problem directly. The council speaker leaned forward in his ancient ceremonial chair. Admiral Hayes, what precisely are you proposing? Hayes smiled, and every military analyst in the chamber recognized the expression of someone who held all the advantageous cards. In a negotiation, humanity proposes the establishment of a 50-light-year neutral zone around all human territory. Any vessel entering this zone without specific authorization will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. We also request formal recognition of human territorial sovereignty and a council resolution prohibiting unprovoked attacks on civilian targets. The Veltarian delegate, an elderly diplomat named Veltar, rose shakily to his feet. Admiral Hayes, such a neutral zone would encompass star systems currently claimed by 7 different species. You're asking us to abandon established territorial rights. No, Hayes replied with deadly calm. I'm telling you that those territorial claims are void. The species that held them either participated in intelligence operations against human space or provided support to the hegemony's attack on New Terra. They forfeited their territorial rights when they chose to treat humanity as a target rather than a neighbor. The chamber exploded into chaos as delegates from the affected species shouted protests and demands for clarification. Hayes waited patiently for order to be restored, her expression never changing from polite professionalism. When the council speaker finally managed to restore quiet, she continued as if the outburst had never occurred. The alternative to accepting these territorial adjustments is simple, she said. Any species that refuses to recognize human sovereignty can expect to receive the same treatment we gave the Veltarian hegemony. We will defend our people and our territory with every resource at our disposal, and we will pursue anyone who threatens us back to their home systems if necessary. The threat was delivered with such matter-of-fact casualness that it took several seconds for its implications to sink in. Hayes wasn't just demanding territorial concessions. She was offering every species in the chamber a choice between peaceful coexistence and total war with an enemy that had just demonstrated the ability to destroy military forces far superior to their own. Admiral, the representative of the ancient Kethmorn Empire, said carefully, "You're asking the Council to legitimize territorial expansion through military conquest. This sets a dangerous precedent for galactic stability." Hayes turned to face the Kethmoran delegate directly. Counselor Vethran, humanity has no interest in conquest or territorial expansion. We want to be left alone to develop our colonies and raise our children in peace. But we've learned that peaceful intentions are often interpreted as weakness by species that respect only strength. So we're making our position clear in terms that everyone can understand. She gestured again, and the holographic display changed to show the current disposition of human forces, instead of the 12 modest patrol fleets that had existed before. New Terra. The display showed a network of military installations and rapid response forces that covered human space like a three-dimensional web. Humanity now maintains active defense fleets in all of our territories, Hayes announced. We have early warning systems that can detect approaching vessels at ranges of up to 100 light-years. We have rapid response capabilities that can deploy overwhelming force to any threatened location within 72 hours. And we have made it clear to our people that any attack on human civilians will result in immediate and total retaliation. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Every delegate understood what they were seeing. Humanity had used the Valtarian attack as justification for a military buildup that transformed them from a minor colonial power into a major military force. More importantly, they had demonstrated both the capability and willingness to use that force without regard for traditional diplomatic protocols. The choice before this council is simple, Hayes concluded. Recognize humanity's right to exist in peace or face the consequences of treating us as prey. We came to the stars seeking new homes for our children and new friends among the stars. We found predators who saw us as easy targets. Today, the galaxy learns which of us was mistaken. The vote, when it finally came after 6 hours of heated debate, was not even close. 41 species voted to recognize human territorial claims and establish the requested neutral zone. 4 species abstained, and only 2 voted against the resolution. The Valtarian hegemony was not permitted to vote as they were now classified as a defeated aggressor nation under council jurisdiction. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, Hayes remained at the speaker's podium, watching the representatives of dozens of civilizations who had just learned to see humanity in an entirely new light. They had expected to meet with representatives of a young, weak species seeking council protection from aggressive neighbors. Instead, they had negotiated with predators who were offering one chance at peaceful coexistence. The final entry in the council records of that historic session was brief, but significant. Humanity hereby granted full territorial sovereignty and defensive rights. All member species advised that unprovoked aggression against human targets will result in immediate suspension of diplomatic immunity and council protection. 6 months later, military academies throughout the galaxy began offering a new required course for all officers: Human Warfare Doctrine, Case Studies in Asymmetric Response. The first lesson always began with the same quote from Admiral Hayes's address to the council: "We came seeking peace, but we brought war. Touch our children, and learn why Earth's history is written in the ashes of those who underestimated our protective instincts." The galaxy had been warned.